Never mistake a quiet exit for weakness. Some storms don't make noise when they leave. They make noise when they're gone. My dear chosen ones, lean in for a moment, because this isn't just another dramatic tale or poetic narrative. This is a reality check wrapped in truth, wrapped in experience, wrapped in evolution. There comes a moment when the very person who thought they were writing your story ends up choking on the plot twist they never saw coming. And right now, the one who attempted to play you, outsmart you, or shrink you is discovering something they were never prepared to face. You were never the pawn, you were the turning point. You see, chosen ones, there's something incredibly unsettling that happens when someone builds their confidence not from their own strength, but from the belief that you'll never stop giving them access, emotion, reaction, or relevance. They weren't addicted to you. They were addicted to the version of themselves they believed existed because you tolerated them. They didn't crave power. They craved control. And control only works when the other person doesn't know they hold the exit key. You watched, you observed, you analyzed, and without announcing it, you evolved. That's what rattles them. Not your silence, not your distance, but your transformation. Let's speak the truth out loud. The person who wronged you didn't think you were weak. They thought you were predictable. They assumed your loyalty was permanent. Your emotions were accessible on demand, and your heart was their never-ending resupply of validation. They thought you would react, chase, defend, explain, cling, or collapse. They counted on your empathy to hand them power they never earned. What they didn't know was that chosen ones don't explode, they upgrade. And now, while you rise, they unravel. While you regain clarity, they replay conversations in slow-motion panic. While you're building, they're overthinking. While you sleep peacefully, they stare at ceilings wrestling with invisible shadows shaped like regret, ego, and disbelief. Isn't it ironic? The one who claimed to be unbothered now checks imaginary messages, rereads old interactions, and stalks your energy like a ghost trying to feel alive again. Before we move forward, chosen ones, if this message is already shifting something inside you, take a moment to support this journey. Your like, your comment, and your subscription are not just clicks. They are fuel that keeps this movement alive. They remind us that there are people out there who want truth, clarity, healing, and power, not sugar-coated illusions. When you support this channel, you help us continue creating content that wakes minds, strengthens spirits, and inspires transformation. So like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this message, because empowerment grows when it spreads. Chosen ones, understand something powerful. When you walk away, it's not footsteps they hear, it's consequences. The walls don't collapse because you slammed the door. They collapse because your presence was the structure. They always believed they were the sun and you were just orbiting, but they're now learning the hardest astronomical lesson. Some stars don't revolve. They explode into a new universe. They wonder, how did the person I thought I had wrapped around my finger become someone I can no longer predict? They wonder, how did they detach without warning, without fight, without emotional residue? They wonder, how are they glowing in silence when I expected them to crumble? The answer is simple, because chosen ones don't break, they awaken. Maybe you're thinking right now, but why me? Why did I have to be the target, the lesson, the experiment? Because the strongest steel is never shaped in comfort. Pressure introduced you to your next evolution, not your ending. You weren't selected because you were weak. You were selected because you were the only one strong enough to walk away without needing to prove anything. That is real power. Silent, controlled, unbothered power. The type of power that cannot be borrowed, stolen, mimicked, or manipulated. This isn't just about them losing control. It's about you realizing you were never meant to be controlled to begin with. This isn't just about their chaos. It's about your clarity. This isn't a story of revenge. It's a story of realization, reclamation, and redirection. And chosen ones, don't misunderstand this moment. You didn't destroy them. You simply stopped holding up the illusion they depended on. Detachment wasn't your escape, it was their reveal. So buckle up, because what comes next isn't a fairy tale. It's a psychological documentary filmed in real time, where the tables don't just turn, they spin like a tornado, flip like a coin, and land exactly where truth demands they land. And by the time this chapter is done, chosen ones, you will not only understand why they're losing control, you will finally understand the level of power you were carrying the entire time. Chosen ones, before we move deeper into this revelation, take a moment to anchor yourself right here with us. Your engagement isn't just a button tap. It tells us that voices like yours are awake, aware, and refusing to settle for silence. If this message resonates with the shift you've been feeling, hit like, subscribe, and comment. The tables have turned to claim your spot among those who refuse to be played twice. Your support keeps this truth-driven content alive, sharp, and unapologetically real. Stay right here, because what's coming next will feel like someone finally narrated your unspoken story. Number 1. The control they flexed was never power. It was a countdown ready to detonate. The power they flexed was never power. It was a fuse waiting for flame. Some people don't break when you leave. They break because they finally have to face the truth without you holding their world together. My dear chosen ones, let's peel back the curtain and speak the kind of truth that doesn't whisper. It echoes. The person who tried to outsmart you didn't just underestimate you, they miscalculated their entire sense of power. They believed that manipulation, emotional strategy, silent mind games, and psychological tug-of-war were signs of dominance. They truly thought they were untouchable, like they could bend the rules of honesty, loyalty, respect, and emotional responsibility without ever paying the price. They strutted through life as if deception was a crown, not realizing it was a fuse. And chosen ones, you weren't the weakness in their story. You were the trigger they never saw coming. Let's address the silent question you may have carried. Why do people like that even target someone like me? Because chosen ones radiate value, depth, emotional intelligence, and rare loyalty. Qualities that manipulators can't create for themselves. They borrow strength from others. They borrow validation from attention. They borrow identity from control. But chosen ones, here's the real kicker. You can be borrowed, but you can never be owned. And when someone tries to treat you like a puppet instead of a person, your absence becomes their undoing. They built their influence like a fancy tower made of dominoes, impressive to look at, fragile underneath. They believed their charm could hide their cracks. But manipulation isn't power, it's camouflage. It's not strategy, it's delay. It's not intelligence, it's insecurity wearing a confident mask. And chosen ones, the moment you stopped reacting, the moment you stopped feeding their illusion, the countdown began. Not because you attacked, but because they lost the stabilizer they didn't even realize they were leaning on. You see, chosen ones, some people rely on your empathy like oxygen, but insult you as if you're irrelevant. They depend on your emotional availability while mocking your sensitivity. They draw strength from your understanding, then call you too emotional. But here's the twist. When you finally decide peace is more valuable than proving your point, they don't just lose access, they lose identity, and that is the exact moment where chaos begins taking their seat. Maybe you've wondered, why didn't they collapse while they were manipulating others? Why now? Because a manipulator's power is only active when someone is plugged into it. The moment you disconnect, their battery dies. It was never their brilliance, it was your energy. It was never their superiority, it was your willingness. And now, with you gone, they're standing in the empty warehouse of their own behavior, hearing every echo they tried to silence with manipulation. Chosen ones, understand this deeply. People can hide lies, but they can't hide consequences. They can bury truth, but they can't bury outcomes. They can manipulate perception, but they can't manipulate reality forever. The very tactics they use to keep others confused now haunt them internally like a siren they can't shut off. Their mind is no longer a playground. It's a crime scene filled with evidence they can't disarm. You didn't ruin them, their habits did. You didn't expose them, their patterns did. You didn't destroy their image, their choices did. Chosen ones don't need revenge. Evolution does the heavy lifting. When you outgrow someone who counted on your vulnerability, they don't just lose you. They lose the version of themselves they pretended to be. While standing next to you, you were the balance to their chaos, the clarity to their confusion, the anchor to their instability. Without you, there is no buffer between their behavior and its consequences. They now face the emotional storm they once redirected onto others. And now, they finally see the truth they never included in their plan. Real power is never taken, it is earned. Influence without integrity is temporary. Control without character is collapsible. Manipulation may win the moment, but it always loses the ending. So, my dear chosen ones, do not question your worth for one more second. You were not the downfall. You were the reveal. You didn't trigger their chaos. You stopped containing it. They weren't powerful. They were simply unchallenged. And the very moment you decided to protect your peace instead of defending your presence, the clock on their illusion ran out. Welcome to the part of the story where truth finally has the microphone. Number 2. Their influence only existed because your heart was still in the room. Their so-called power was just the reflection of your loyalty, not the reality of their strength. My dear chosen ones, here's a truth most people don't like to say out loud. Some individuals never had real power over you. They only had access to your heart, and access, when misinterpreted, can feel like authority to someone who has never tasted real emotional strength. The person who tried to control you didn't dominate you because they were superior, smarter, or stronger. They felt powerful because you cared. They felt influential because you loved. Their confidence wasn't born from who they were. It was borrowed from what you gave. You see, chosen ones, when a person operates through ego rather than authenticity, they confuse your emotional investment with their personal power. They assume that because you stayed, you couldn't leave. Because you forgave, you lacked discernment. Because you cared deeply, you lacked boundaries. They completely misunderstood that your loyalty was a gift, not an obligation, not a weakness, and definitely not a leash for them to pull. Let's speak directly to what you may have never admitted. Yes, they were able to get reactions out of you. Not because they were skilled manipulators, but because you genuinely cared and hoped for better. When you love someone, your heart wants to solve, not escape. It wants to repair, not abandon. You tried to understand them, support them, and believe in a version of them that even they had not become. But when someone confuses love for leverage, they turn affection into ammunition. And that moment plants the beginning of their downfall. Their illusion of control existed only within the space your emotions created. Your love was the soil, their ego was the seed, and your patience was the water. Not because you were submissive, but because you saw potential where they only saw opportunity. They believed that your attachment would always override your awareness. They miscalculated the strength of a heart that wakes up rather than wears out. When chosen ones care, they care fully. But when they detach permanently. Nothing shakes a false controller more than realizing their influence depended on the emotional availability of the person they assumed would always be there. And chosen ones, your quiet detachment is louder than any confrontation you could ever give. They expected arguments, tears, breakdowns, and desperate attempts. But instead, you gave them what their ego was never prepared for: nothing, silence, emotional distance, non-reaction, indifference, the very thing they spent their life running from. Because here's the psychological reality: a person who relies on manipulation to feel powerful crumbles when their target no longer reacts. They can't function without emotional fuel. Think of it like a fire. Flames look impressive, hot, powerful, until the wood is gone. You were the wood, the oxygen, the spark, and the room temperature that kept them relevant. When you stopped feeding their emotional bonfire, their flame didn't just dim. It exposed how small it always was. Chosen ones, isn't it interesting how they once bragged that nothing got to them, yet now they are the ones overthinking every silent moment between you? Isn't it ironic how they once acted like you needed them, yet now they are the ones replaying, rehearsing, and revisiting every interaction in fear of what they cannot fix? Indifference is not passive, it is powerful. Silence is not surrender, it is strategy. And distance is not avoidance, it is elevation. You didn't win by overpowering them, you won by outgrowing the version of yourself that tolerated them. And now, without your reactions, your explanations, your emotional responses, and your presence, they are facing the raw truth. Their power was a reflection of your emotional commitment, not evidence of their dominance. Without you, their tactics fall flat. Without you, their games lose purpose. Without you, their confidence turns into confusion. Without you, their ego has no audience. Now their mind runs marathons, not because they care about the truth, but because they no longer control the narrative. They stand alone with the reality they once hid behind your empathy, and that moment, that internal chaos, is when they finally confront a truth they avoided. They were never the hero, never the mastermind, never the puppet master. You were just generous enough to play along until you saw through it. So remember, chosen one, your love didn't make you weak. It made them believe they were strong. But your detachment proved where the real strength lived, and now as their world spirals without the emotional supply they depended on, they are forced to watch the collapse of a kingdom built on borrowed bricks, bricks that were never theirs to begin with. Number 3. The turmoil they're drowning in is a perfect reflection of their own methods. Their downfall is the reflection they spent years avoiding. Life doesn't always return what you deserve. Chosen one, sometimes it returns exactly what you created. My dear chosen ones, let's talk about something brutally poetic. Some people spend so much time perfecting their tricks, sharpening their manipulation, and rehearsing their illusions that they forget reality is not a stage. It's a mirror. They weave lies like silk, thinking it will become fabric strong enough to clothe their entire identity. They design emotional traps, confident that no one will ever slip through the cracks. They orchestrate situations like puppet masters, fully convinced they are the only ones holding the strings. But chosen one, the universe doesn't work like a private theater show. Eventually the curtain falls, the spotlight turns, and every action becomes a reflection, not a performance. You were not their victim, you were their reflection point. They mistook your empathy for emptiness, your silence for blindness, your patience for ignorance, and your heart for weakness. They believed that if they stacked enough lies, layered enough charm, and controlled enough outcomes, they could outrun truth forever. But when a person builds their life like a house of cards, it doesn't matter how confident they look while constructing. One breath of honesty makes the entire kingdom collapse. The chaos they are drowning in right now is not an accident, not misfortune, not bad luck, but a mirror turned inward. They are living inside the emotional maze they designed for you. Every twist and turn they created to confuse you has become a dead end for them. The voices they once manipulated are now echoing back with questions they cannot answer. The allies they recruited through charm are starting to see through the fog. The stories they told are no longer matching the outcomes people are witnessing. Their mask isn't just slipping, it's dissolving, and they can't control who notices anymore. Chosen one, understand this. You didn't sabotage them, you didn't expose them, you didn't ruin anything. You simply stopped participating in a game that required your confusion to function. Manipulation only works when the target stays emotionally plugged into the system. The moment you stepped outside of their script, the entire storyline began to glitch like corrupted software. This chaos was already inside them. You merely stopped holding the lid shut. Now they are experiencing the psychological equivalent of standing in a room full of mirrors. But instead of seeing different angles of strength, charm, or superiority, they're seeing every lie, every scheme, every half-truth, every manipulation, and every fake persona reflected right back at them. And for the first time, they can't find a distraction strong enough to escape their own reflection. People often fear external consequences, but the most powerful consequences are internal. When the mind finally realizes it has become a prisoner of its own tactics. Their anxiety is not random. Their sleeplessness is not coincidence. Their social discomfort is not temporary. They are experiencing what happens when someone builds a life not based on authenticity, but on control, and loses access to the person who unknowingly balanced their instability. Perhaps you wonder, why does it seem like everything is falling apart for them now? Because chosen ones carry a rare kind of emotional currency, clarity. When you removed your clarity, they were left alone with their chaos. When you removed your compassion, they were left alone with their fear. When you removed your honesty, they were left alone with their lies. And when you removed your presence, they had no shield between themselves and the consequences they've been outrunning. The very tactics they used to corner you are now boxing them in. The very rumors they whispered are now circling back to their doorstep. The very confusion they cultivated is now clouding their own judgment. The very emotional traps they designed are now catching their own feet. This is not vengeance. This is not downfall. This is simply truth, unfiltered. Manipulators don't fear losing control. They fear being seen without control. And now, chosen one, nothing is hidden anymore. Not because you exposed them, but because they finally ran out of places to hide. Their chaos is not noise. It is consequence. Their panic is not random. It is reflection. And the most poetic part, they didn't just play the game, they became it. Number 4, your kindness wasn't innocence, it was calculated emotional intelligence. Your kindness wasn't clueless, it was calculated control. Sometimes the sharpest move isn't striking back. It's letting them reveal who they are without your fingerprints on the scene. My dear chosen ones, this is the part that stings them the most. Not the fact that you walked away, not the fact that you healed, not even the fact that they lost access to your heart. What haunts them is realizing that your kindness wasn't the result of innocence, confusion, or emotional immaturity. It was restraint. You weren't blind. You were watching. You weren't naive. You were evaluating. You weren't lost. You were choosing which version of yourself to show. They thought they were studying you, but the truth is, you were studying them the entire time. See, manipulators operate under one powerful delusion. If you don't argue, you don't see what I'm doing. They connect silence to stupidity, patience to vulnerability, and kindness to lack of awareness. But chosen ones, your silence was never emptiness. It was strategy. You listened deeper than they expected, observed further than they imagined, and understood more than they were comfortable with. You saw the micro-expressions behind the apologies, the tone shifts behind the compliments, the timing behind the affection, and the gaps inside every story they tried to decorate as truth. You weren't trapped. You were documenting. There's a level of emotional discipline chosen ones carry that manipulators can't comprehend. While they were performing, you were analyzing. While they were plotting, you were decoding. While they were rehearsing lines in their imaginary play, you were reading the script they didn't know they were leaking. And now, as their illusion collapses, they are forced to face what they never accounted for. You were not the pawn. You were the pattern recognizer. That realization hits harder than any confrontation ever could. Chosen ones don't explode. They endure intentionally. You didn't clap back because you already understood that people reveal their truth with time, not arguments. You didn't expose them because you knew exposure is most powerful when it happens through their own behavior, not your accusations. You didn't react because you recognized that emotional control is the ultimate checkmate in any psychological game. And while they mistook your calm for confusion, you were actually holding power they had no access to: self-awareness. Imagine how unsettling it must feel for them now. They're replaying conversations word for word, trying to figure out if you knew what they were doing at that exact moment. They're wondering if your quiet nod meant agreement or internal confirmation that they were showing their true nature. They're questioning if every smile you gave was genuine or strategic grace. They're terrified because they now realize they weren't fooling you. They were exposing themselves in front of someone who remembers everything. Chosen ones, understand how rare your energy is. You didn't mirror their chaos because you refused to forfeit your emotional intelligence. You didn't fight for your innocence because you already knew your truth didn't need defending. It needed distance. You didn't choose revenge because you understood something they didn't. Real strength is not measured by how loudly you respond, but by how silently you refuse to be lowered. They thought they were in control because you didn't interrupt, but you were silent because you refused to waste breath where growth couldn't exist. Your restraint wasn't weakness, it was emotional maturity. And now that they finally understand it, the discomfort they feel isn't regret, it's realization. Realization that you saw more than you said, you understood more than you reacted to, you noticed more than you confronted, and the most painful realization of all, you could have destroyed them with the truth, but you chose to free yourself instead. This forces them to face a truth they never rehearsed for. You weren't outplayed, you were outgrowing them in real time. They didn't lose you because they tricked you. They lost you because your intelligence outlasted their performance. So chosen ones, let this settle in your spirit. Your kindness was never a doorway they could exploit. It was a mirror they eventually cracked themselves. And now, as the consequences unfold, they are left with a truth sharper than any revenge could ever deliver. You were never the fool. You were the lesson. Number 5. Their collapse started the moment your emotions stopped being accessible. Their control crumbled. The exact moment your emotions logged out. There's a silent moment in every psychological tug-of-war where the rope doesn't snap. It simply gets released, not because one side ran out of strength, but because the other side finally realized they no longer needed to prove anything. My dear chosen ones, that is the precise moment the player who wronged you began losing control. They thought the turning point was the day you blocked their number, ignored their messages, or stopped showing up. But the truth hits much deeper. The real collapse began long before you ever physically walked away. It started the moment you disconnected emotionally, when your heart no longer picked up their calls, even if your phone still could. Distance isn't what scared them. Emotional silence is what shattered them. Many people believe power is in presence, but manipulators know their power comes from access. Not physical access, but emotional access. As long as they could make you react, defend yourself, explain, question your worth, or chase after closure, they felt in control. They fed off your emotional response the way fire feeds off oxygen, without realizing that once you stopped providing fuel, the flame does not explode. It simply dies. They didn't fear losing you. They feared losing their influence over how you felt. That was their real supply. Chosen ones, emotional detachment is not coldness, it is evolution, and evolution is the one language that manipulative people never learn to read. They can decode guilt, confusion, fear, insecurity, attachment, and longing, but they cannot interpret indifference, not because they're incapable, but because they never imagined they would come face to face with a version of you who didn't need them anymore. When you stopped reacting, they didn't just feel ignored. They felt erased from a story they once assumed they controlled. This is where their internal panic began. For them, emotional availability was never something to appreciate, it was something to exploit. They counted on your compassion, your softness, your patience, and your willingness to forgive. They thought you would always care, even when they didn't. They assumed your emotions would forever be a revolving door they could enter at will, no matter how many times they left you standing alone in the hallway. What they never calculated was the possibility that you could outgrow the version of yourself that tolerated them. Chosen ones, emotional detachment is not the same as becoming numb. Numbness means you stopped feeling because you were overwhelmed or defeated. Detachment means you stopped feeling because you finally understood your value. The difference is everything. When you detached, it wasn't an emotional shutdown, it was an emotional graduation. They didn't lose you to anger, they lost you to clarity. Think about how many times they expected the same cycle to repeat, the same explanations, the same arguments, the same "maybe I misunderstood," the same "let's try again," the same emotional return. They built their entire confidence on the assumption that you would keep responding the way you always had. They didn't realize that emotional access has an expiration date when respect is not included. Chosen ones, when you closed the emotional door, they didn't hear silence, they heard accountability. They realized that the connection they thought was permanent actually came with conditions: honesty, respect, effort, and reciprocity. No amount of charm, apologies, nostalgia, or remember when can reopen a door that was closed with self-respect instead of revenge. The reason they are spiraling now is simple. People leave relationships every day, but emotional escape is rare. Most walk away physically but continue to relive every memory mentally. Most detach from the person but stay attached to the wound. You didn't do that. You healed, learned, closed, upgraded, and moved on without making an announcement. That is a kind of closure they cannot manipulate, interrupt, or reverse. This is why they are unsettled. They don't feel abandoned. They feel irrelevant. They don't feel replaced. They feel powerless. They don't want you back. They want access back. But chosen ones don't return to cages once they learn how far they can fly. And the moment your emotions stopped responding to their strategies, their chapter ended. Not with a fight, but with a full stop. So let this sink deeply into your spirit. You didn't win by leaving. You won by no longer needing them. You didn't defeat them by cutting contact. You defeated them by cutting emotional access. That was the checkmate they never prepared for, because they were busy planning your breakdown while you were busy rebuilding your boundaries. And that, chosen ones, is when the game ended. Number 6. Without your presence, their carefully polished image started cracking like cheap paint. When you walked away, their reputation went down with you. My dear chosen ones, here's a truth most people never realize until it's far too late. Some individuals don't build their own image, they borrow one. They don't cultivate character, they stand next to someone who has it. And in this case, the person who wronged you is now discovering what happens when the very person who made them look valuable, balanced, relatable, or respectable is no longer standing beside them. Their reputation didn't crumble because people changed. It crumbled because the illusion lost its foundation, and that foundation was you. Some people don't evolve, they camouflage, and when the one who gave them cover leaves, their true reflection can't hide anymore. Chosen ones, understand this. You were never just someone in their life. You weren't simply a partner, friend, family member, or associate. You were the stabilizer, the equalizer, the social credibility shield, the unpaid PR team, the reputation filter, and the human balance wheel. You brought emotional intelligence where they brought emotional volatility. You brought empathy where they brought ego. You brought clarity where they brought confusion. That contrast was powerful, but here's the twist. Only you were aware of it. They truly believed they were the likable one, the charming one, the grounded one, the admired one. They believed they controlled the room, when in reality they were simply standing next to someone who could handle the room. Chosen ones, people didn't respect them. People respected them because you were there. You were the invisible translator of their behavior, the one who softened their rough edges, who made excuses for their poor choices, who buffered the awkwardness, who calmed the energy, and who balanced their impulsiveness. Without knowing it, you were the quiet force that made them appear emotionally functional, socially acceptable, and psychologically stable. You see, when a person has internal instability, they subconsciously attach themselves to someone who has internal alignment. Not because they love them the way love is supposed to be, but because alignment, kindness, intelligence, and maturity create protection for them. They basked in your glow, but never admitted they were standing in your light. And now that your energy is gone, people around them are noticing something they didn't notice before. They aren't who they seem to be. Now conversations feel uneasy, eye contact feels suspicious, interactions feel heavier, and the charisma they once performed now looks rehearsed instead of natural. Their mask isn't slipping, it's falling off. Why? Because masks need maintenance, and chosen one, you were the maintenance. Their temper is no longer passion. Their manipulation is no longer misunderstood intentions. Their coldness is no longer being guarded. Their inconsistency is no longer having layers. Without you, people are seeing the raw version, not the edited one. You didn't sabotage their reputation. You simply stopped covering for it. You stopped defending behavior that never deserved a defense. You stopped offering grace to someone who weaponized your loyalty. You stopped holding emotional weight that wasn't yours. You stopped being their stabilizing agent, their emotional therapist, their excuse provider, and their silent cheerleader. And now, people are pulling back. Not because of rumors, not because of drama, not because of gossip, but because energy doesn't lie, even when words do. The absence of your balancing presence made their true traits appear louder, sharper, and more unfiltered than ever before. Every social interaction is revealing what your energy used to disguise, and chosen ones, that realization hits them deeper than any argument ever could. They didn't lose popularity. They lost the person who made them look worth knowing. They are not being judged unfairly. They are simply being seen without your influence attached. And being seen unfiltered is their biggest fear, because they never learned to build an identity without using someone else's strengths as a safety net. This is not revenge, chosen ones. It is revelation. You were not their accessory. You were their reputation backbone. You were not their supporter. You were their social stabilizer. You were not their background. You were their character amplifier. Now they finally understand that while they were busy trying to control or belittle you, they were depending on you more than they ever want to admit. And the most powerful part, you didn't destroy their image. You simply stopped carrying it. Number 7, their entire strategy imploded when you stopped following the role they assigned you. When you refused their script, their whole performance fell apart. Chosen one, let's dive into a truth very few ever break free from. You were never simply dealing with a person. You were dealing with someone who thought they had already written your entire emotional destiny. They didn't just speak to you, they cast you. They didn't just interact with you, they assigned you a role. In their mind, you were the predictable character who would always react on cue, hurt when poked, chase when ignored, explain when blamed, apologize when confused, and forgive when mistreated. To them, you were a self-reloading emotional vending machine, always ready to deliver what they wanted so long as they pushed the right button. They didn't build a relationship with you. They built a storyline about you. But chosen ones, what they failed to realize is that real power never lives in scripts. It lives in awareness, evolution, and silence. They believed they could control your reactions because your empathy read like an open book to them. They studied your emotional patterns like weather predictions, convinced that a storm would always come at the same time, in the same way, with the same intensity. To them, your emotions were tools, your care was leverage, your forgiveness was a safety net. The irony is not that they misunderstood who you were. It's that they never truly bothered to learn. They didn't want the real you. They wanted the version that was easiest for them to manage, navigate, and benefit from. But chosen ones are not fixed characters. They are evolving consciousnesses. And the moment you realized you were being directed instead of respected, everything changed. You didn't yell, you didn't scream, you didn't crumble, you didn't audition for the same role again. You simply stopped participating. And that was the moment everything inside their illusion began to crack. When you stopped defending yourself, they lost the ability to feel superior. When you stopped reacting, they lost their fuel. When you stopped explaining, they lost their anchor. When you stopped chasing, they lost their confidence. And when you finally walked, mentally before physically, they didn't just lose access to you, they lost control over their own narrative. This wasn't a small disruption to them, it was a psychological freefall. Their entire sense of control was built on the assumption that you would behave exactly as predicted. And when you didn't, panic didn't just tap on their door, it broke in, sat on their couch, and refused to leave. Suddenly, they couldn't anticipate your next move. They couldn't predict whether you would return, respond, react, or disappear forever. For someone who depends on predictability, that uncertainty becomes mental chaos. They weren't afraid of losing you. They were afraid of losing the version of you that made them feel untouchable. Now they are left questioning themselves, replaying everything, trying to figure out where their strategy failed. They thought they were genius chess players, but they were simply repeating the same moves, expecting you to never catch on. They weren't masterminds. They were emotional gamblers placing the same bet over and over. And when you changed the rules instead of fighting the game, they lost without you ever having to win. Chosen ones, you didn't break the script by force. You broke it by growth. You became quiet in places you used to be loud. You chose distance in moments you once chased clarity. You built peace where you once begged for fairness. You prioritized self-worth over emotional negotiation. That wasn't weakness, that was transformation. And transformation confuses people who never saw you as capable of evolving beyond their expectations. And now, here is the part they will never admit out loud. They are not upset because you walked away. They are upset because they no longer know who you are. The role they wrote has been deleted. The version they crafted has disappeared. The buttons they pressed don't work anymore. The script they rehearsed is useless. They are not battling you. They are battling unpredictability. And for a person who survives on reaction, unpredictability is psychological quicksand. So chosen one, understand this deeply. Breaking the script wasn't just you reclaiming your power. It was exposing that they never had any to begin with. Your silence was not avoidance, it was evolution. Your distance was not running, it was rising. Your detachment was not coldness, it was clarity. And your unpredictability was not revenge, it was freedom. They didn't just lose control of you, they lost control of the only storyline where they felt relevant. And that, chosen one, is the downfall they never prepared for. Number 8. Their ego took the hit because you didn't break the way they secretly hoped you would. They expected your breakdown, but your evolution became their turning point. They once convinced themselves that you were fragile, emotionally dependent, and easy to dismantle. They believed that if they pulled away, mistreated you, belittled your worth, or disrupted your peace, you would crumble into a version of yourself that needed them for stability. They assumed their absence would shatter you, their silence would confuse you, and their disrespect would weaken your identity. They treated the situation like a psychological experiment where they believed they already knew the results. In their mind, your reaction was predictable, your emotions were controllable, and your healing was impossible without their presence. But Chosen One, life has a subtle yet unforgettable way of flipping the script, especially when someone underestimates the strength they never took the time to truly understand. They weren't operating randomly. They were aiming for an outcome. Every withdrawal, every mixed signal, every manipulation, every emotional detour was designed to create a narrative where your pain would feed their self-image. They wanted to stand taller by assuming you would collapse shorter. They wanted to walk away feeling victorious, thinking their exit was your downfall. They imagined a future where they would say, "Look who failed after I left," while proudly wearing the illusion of strength they believed they had over you. What they didn't see, what they never accounted for, was the silent awakening that happens when chosen ones go through emotional impact. You didn't break, you awakened. Your silence was not confusion, it was recalibration. Your distance was not defeat, it was elevation. Your lack of response was not weakness, it was strategy. You didn't chase because you finally realized you weren't losing anything necessary. You didn't argue because you outgrew the need to prove what was already true. You didn't collapse because your spirit was not built on dependency, but on growth, adaptability, and inner awareness. And when they finally realized there would be no emotional explosion, no breakdown, no desperate attempt, no collapse, that's when the shock set in. They waited for evidence that their actions worked, but all they found was silence where chaos was expected and self-respect where damage was predicted. Chosen One, your transformation didn't require announcements, explanations, or witnesses. It required privacy, introspection, and self-alignment. While they believed you were fading, you were actually rebuilding. While they assumed you were drowning, you were learning how to breathe underwater. While they expected you to beg, you were learning how to walk away with dignity. Evolution doesn't always happen loudly. Sometimes it begins in the quiet moments when you decide that your peace matters more than proving a point, and nothing affects someone more than realizing the person they tried to underestimate became someone they can no longer influence, predict, or define. Your glow-up was not cosmetic. It was cognitive, emotional, and internal. You didn't become colder, you became wiser. You didn't stop caring, you stopped surrendering. You didn't build walls, you built standards. You didn't harden your heart, you strengthened your boundaries. They expected the same version of you to return, but chosen ones don't return. They reinvent. And that reinvention wasn't designed to impress them. It was designed to support the future you deserved, not the story someone tried to limit you within. Now they wrestle with a truth they never wanted to confront. Their assumption of your weakness was actually a mirror of their own. The ego they once inflated using imagined superiority now struggles to breathe without validation. The outcome they were certain about has reversed, and the ending they expected has rewritten itself without their permission. The collapse they predicted for you is now something they privately fear for themselves, because chosen ones don't just heal. They transform into someone their past cannot manipulate ever again. And that, chosen one, is why your evolution will always speak louder than any explanation you could have given. You didn't survive what happened. You grew because of it, and growth, not revenge, is the plot twist they never prepared for. Number 9. They confused having access to you with having permission to shape your future. They confused temporary access with lifetime authority. My dear chosen ones, let's expose one of the most dangerous illusions manipulators create, the false belief that your openness equaled their ownership. Some people mistake proximity for permission and access for authority. They didn't just enter your life. They walked in assuming you handed them the master key to your direction, identity, growth, and future. They misunderstood the privilege of being allowed close to you as a right to dictate your next move. They believed that once they were inside your emotional walls, they could redecorate your purpose, rearrange your identity, or rewrite your timeline. But chosen ones, hear this loud and clear. Letting someone stand next to you never means they get to stand over you. Manipulative individuals often think influence is a trophy, not a responsibility. They saw your openness not as a sign of trust, but as an entry point to install control. They misread your vulnerability as a door, your care as a leash, your loyalty as a contract, and your emotional honesty as submission. They believed that once you trusted them, you would bend, shrink, or pause whenever they felt threatened, insecure, or unprepared for your next level. They saw themselves as the narrator to your storyline, assuming they could determine when you rise, how fast you progress, and who you become. But chosen ones, your evolution isn't a group project, and nobody's ego has clearance to edit your growth. They truly thought access to your thoughts meant power over your decisions. They assumed knowing your dreams meant they could put expiration dates on them. They believed that because you shared your wounds, they had the right to press them. They believed your emotional transparency granted them psychological territory. But chosen ones, the only thing more terrifying than someone who tries to control you is the moment they realize they never actually could. The shock hits them not when you leave, but when they discover you were always capable of walking without permission. The moment they tried to shrink your potential to fit their comfort zone, the balance of power shifted. They believed your path could be paused by their opinions, delayed by their doubt, or limited by their fear. They tried subtle strategies. Are you sure? I don't think that's for you. You're dreaming too big. You're not ready yet. They disguised discouragement as logic and concern. They weren't trying to protect you. They were trying to protect their position. They wanted you small enough to need them, uncertain enough to seek their approval, and emotionally invested enough to question yourself more than you questioned them. They didn't want to lose you. They wanted to keep you controllable. But chosen ones, your growth didn't stop. It paused to gather clarity. And clarity always exposes what control tries to hide. The moment you stopped seeking validation, the power dynamic collapsed. The emotional gravity they once believed they had no longer existed. You didn't break away with rage. You drifted away with realization. You didn't slam a door. You simply stopped opening it. The release didn't feel like abandonment. It felt like alignment. And chosen ones, isn't it poetic? Everything they tried to restrict is now expanding faster than before. The opportunities they attempted to block are circling back with better quality. The confidence they thought they weakened has returned with reinforced steel. They thought your dreams relied on their permission, not realizing your ambition was self-fueled. It must sting deeply to witness the success of someone they quietly hoped would stay uncertain. There is no louder consequence than seeing the person you underestimated rise beyond the limits you attempted to place on them. They are now forced to confront a truth that pierces their pride. Access was never ownership, and presence was never power. In reality, they were a chapter, not the author, a character, not the creator, a passerby, not the architect. They did not hold your destiny. They were simply standing near it, misreading the view as control. Watching you thrive without their influence challenges everything they believed about their importance, because it exposes how replaceable they truly were in the story they thought they controlled. Chosen ones, understand this. Nobody owns your direction, identity, or purpose but you. The right to access your life does not come with lifetime authority, emotional dominion, or decision-making privileges. What they mistook as possession was merely temporary proximity. And now that proximity has expired, the illusion has shattered. Their role ended the moment they tried to become more than they were ever invited to be. Their season is over, and your future has already outgrown them. And with that, chosen ones, you can now see the entire picture clearly, not through emotion, but through realization. What you walked away from was never stability, it was limitation disguised as connection. Their chaos became proof of your evolution, and your growth is now evidence of what happens when you reclaim your power. This chapter wasn't your downfall, it was your rise. If this message resonated with you, make sure to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this clarity. And to let me know you're truly stepping into your next level, drop 77 in the comments.